Thank you. I want to talk about two things that I've noticed in the last few years. One is related to pandemic campaigning, um, how political parties have adapted their strategies to lockdown. This might be a short-term thing, but there might also be lessons that they're going to take forward longer term. And one thing I've noticed is, as my own research has focused on in my latest book, available in all good bookstores, um, is the importance of the social aspect of campaigning. That people might get involved in campaigning because they're passionate about the cause, but what keeps them involved is the social aspect. It's hanging out with people that they like. It's going to have a drink afterwards, or it's chatting to people as you're out knocking on doors. So what happens if you can't go out knocking on doors? So one of the things that parties have done traditionally is, for example, organized phone banking sessions, that people come together in a room with their own mobile phones, and they use their 3 minutes to call voters, and you get pictures of that on social media. So what do you do when you can't? What social aspects can you do with social distancing? And one thing I've noticed, again, just viewing people posting pictures of campaigning on Twitter, is that people would use something like Zoom to do phone banking together. So they wouldn't call voters using Zoom. They will be together using Zoom. So imagine a group of people like us right now, but with mobile phones clamped to their heads, and then probably the voice part muted. So they would sit in their own homes, but trying to be together through Zoom. So basically, there have been screen grabs, just like the one that we are looking at now, with people doing the phone banking from their own home, but still trying to be together in some form. So that you are not calling by yourself, you are calling with others, but virtually. So I think it will be interesting to see the extent to which this kind of thing is going to continue. Obviously, you can bring together people from a much wider area if you're doing it virtually, but is it as good compared to sitting in a room together doing these calls where you can chat more easily? So I don't know, but I think it'll be interesting to see the extent to which these kind of virtual ways of campaigning will continue even after, hopefully, at some point in the future, we are allowed to do things normally. Obviously, in UK, everything is fine and we can do whatever we want because we managed the COVID, so we're all fine, honestly. But it'll be interesting to see the extent to which these kinds of COVID, how they've responded to COVID, how many of these things will continue into the post-COVID era. The second thing I wanted to mention was something that came out very strongly in my research for the book that's available in all good bookstores, is I wanted to understand how political parties manage their volunteers. How do they recruit their volunteers? And more, as importantly, how do they keep their volunteers engaged? And as I was doing my reading on this, the literature review on this, I basically found nothing in the literature on political parties, on how do you manage your volunteers. Maybe I missed it. And if anybody knows of anything, please do let me know. For the second edition, maybe. But there's basically nothing on how do parties manage their volunteers. What is good practice in managing your volunteers? There was nothing. So I read a lot of third sector literature, so on non-party political volunteer organizations. And a lot of the literature that I cite in my book is based on the third sector kind of volunteering. And I found a remarkable difference in how managing volunteers was talked about. There was some, I managed to find some primary literature from actually directly from political parties on how they did it. And the difference was really quite marked. So I have recently started volunteering for Epping Forest, which is a big area of woodland just outside of where we live. They have volunteers as part of managing the forest, and I've been spending a lot of time with, much more time than unexpected, with cattle in the last few months as part of my volunteering. I know it's one of those things. But the experience of starting volunteering in the third sector has been markedly different from volunteering in political parties. So both as part of my general political activism and also for my research, I walked into a lot of party campaign HQs, just walked through the door and said, hello, I'm me, can I help? And every single time, apart from one, they've gone, yes, great. And within 5 minutes, I would be sat counting leaflets or stuffing envelopes, or on some occasions, back out the door with a map and a bunch of leaflets. The walking into a volunteering situation in a political party was just turning up, and then they said, yeah, great. And then you're doing it within 5 minutes. My experience of starting to volunteer in Epping Forest, and I think that's quite normal for other types of volunteering in the third sector, was first you have to sign up on a website. Then I was interviewed by a volunteer manager. Then I had to go to an induction, which took 2 hours. Then you sign up for specific volunteering activities. And every time you do that, there's health and safety briefings, and you're talking about how you have to do it. You're supposed to get a uniform, which, although, here we are. I haven't got most of my uniform, but I was very excited that I got my Epping Forest hat. So you get a uniform as part of your volunteering, and the experience from party political volunteering compared with third sector volunteering was just immense. And it seems like, certainly in the UK, and I've been interested to see what experience from other places are, but certainly in the UK, third sector volunteering seems to be governed by a lot of legislation in terms of health and safety, in terms of volunteer protection, all of those things. So third sector volunteer organizations have to do all these things: health and safety, interviews, that kind of thing, safeguarding. And it seems that political parties, you don't have to. It's kind of a Wild West. You can just do whatever you want. So it's not something I've done a great deal of work on yet, but I think it is something that is worthwhile pursuing, because it does seem that in terms of managing your volunteers, political parties have kind of free range compared with other third sector organizations. So it's something that I came out very strongly in my research, and also something that I noticed as part of my my own engagement with volunteering. So I'm interested to see what other people have noticed about that as well. Finally, just very briefly, I noticed that Jenny had a minute left, so I'm going to take her last minute, and it's her fault because you mentioned the Red Wall. And it's the continuing importance of managing your local resources. One of the things that happened this year, earlier this summer, was that Labour lost one of its Red Wall seats in a by-election, Hartlepool. In the UK, the opposition doesn't lose seats to the government. It just doesn't happen in by-elections. And Labour managed in Hartlepool, and it was a huge crisis for Labour. Labour lost a seat, as the opposition lost a seat to the Conservatives, and that just doesn't happen. It's almost unique. A few months later, there was a second by-election in Batley and Spen, and again, Labour was looking like they might lose that by-election. It was very different. Batley and Spen was very different from Hartlepool, but even so, Labour was seen as they're going to lose it again, and it was going to be a huge crisis for Keir Starmer as the leader of the Labour Party, and they didn't lose Batley and Spen, and this massive crisis was averted. And a big part of the reason why they didn't lose it was their local get-out-the-vote efforts. This was seen as one of the important factors. There was a larger turnout amongst Labour voters than expected because Labour got their get-out-the-vote operation on the day right. and the Conservatives didn't. There's something that was commented on at the time. So it shows the continuing importance of managing your local resources. And it makes a difference to the national picture, because the loss of that second seat would have meant a huge crisis for the Labour Party and would have dominated the political landscape. So I'm going to leave it there.